Okay, so next on the agenda, there's Reinout Viersma. So since graduating TU Delft in the Netherlands with an MSc, Reinout has worked in coastal protection, land reclamation, ports and waterway, and marine construction. He has worked for Reinout and predecessors for 25 years in various roles in the execution of dredging and marine construction works, including commercial roads in branch offices around the world, and as a tender manager at Reinout's head office working on large complex projects. Reinout currently works as a program manager of climate adaptation tasked with developing coastal protection to mitigate climate change. Let's welcome Reinout.
Thank you for the opportunity for us to speak here. Renault is a new variant, I think, of my name. My mother intended Reinout, I think, but it's a difficult Dutch name, so I forgive you for that. Let me see. I would like to share with you some ideas about the climate adaptation action plan we have within Van Oord. We are a family-owned company and we have sustainability high in our agenda. We want to create a better world for future generations, and by doing sometimes harm for the environment, we decided to also focus on doing good for the environment. So we try to do balancing off. If we do something a little bit less good for the environment, we try to compensate that with things which are good for the environment. So hopefully I can teach you a bit what we're all doing in that atmosphere. So I'll show you first something about the climate risk overview, something we made a couple of years ago. Then something about nature-based solutions, which you already seen from Alejandro this morning session. And then the barriers which there are to get a nature-based solution implemented worldwide. Let me see if this works. Yeah. So, as you all know, the climate is changing. We're on a path which is no return. I think if we would get our targets on CO2 reduction, I think we still will be facing a changed world. And especially sea level rise, which doesn't go that fast, but still it's upcoming. But it's also the severity of the storms. I think in the previous presentation also mentioned is getting more run up, so we are, let's say, facing more challenging conditions. Something we have been doing in the Netherlands already for many years. So I think in the Netherlands we already live below the sea level. My own house is below the sea level. So if the dikes would break in the Netherlands, I would have a wet home, I think. So let's hope we keep up our good work and keep on protecting. In the Netherlands, we've also faced another problem, which is that we are at the end of a river, and that river flows a lot of water. And I think with the melting of the temperature rising, there will be much more water coming down. So the threat in the Netherlands is also from the inside. And I think on some countries, let's say in Latin America, it's also similar. But I think in the Caribbean, small island states, is more, I think, the coastal protection, which is the issue. So let me take you through our process which we've gone through. We had a 150-year anniversary within Van Oord, and then we invited Christiana Figueras to speak to us. She was the lady, for the people who don't know, who negotiated the Paris Agreement, and she urged us to take action. And we did. We took that very seriously, and we said, well, we want to know in the whole world, where are the weak coastlines? So where are the problems in the world going to be if the scenarios the IPCC is giving are going to be true? Where do we need to be? Because we have technology, we in the Netherlands do this for already 150 years. So where can we help the rest of the world to get more resilient coastlines? So we developed a tool of which I'll show you a little bit later on the content of it. We presented it when we had the Climate Adaptation Summit in the Corona times in the Netherlands. Then we went to COP26 to promote it. We went to COP27 last year. I also attended the UN Water Conference also to raise awareness for climate adaptation. And we're now preparing our program for COP28 in Dubai. And in the meantime, we have completed our tool, which I'll show you, and we're now using that tool to identify the worst impact spots where we try to develop projects from scratch. So it's really like project development. We want to talk to stakeholders and develop projects. Oh, now we need to find out how I get back. Sorry, yeah. So we have a climate adaptation action plan, which contains out of 3 pillars. The first one is a climate risk overview, identifying where these projects are, so we know where we can be of assistance. The second one is our climate adaptation solutions, which is coastal protections, which can be grey infrastructure, but also we prefer to do more and more nature-based solutions or use for hybrid solutions. And the third one is the Climate Adaptation Action Coalition. We're looking for partners because I think this is a global problem and we want to work together with knowledge institutions, banks, Green Climate Fund, Earth Fund, all sorts of various companies in the field, NGOs. We try to collaborate with Worldwide Fund, IUCN, so we try to be very active in this space. I'll show you a clip which explains, hopefully in 1 minute, how the climate risk overview works.
To know where in the world coastal areas are most at risk of getting flooded, we therefore developed the Climate Risk Overview, a smart tool powered by Van Oord, using open source data that brings together key parameters such as low-lying land, populations and assets at risk, sea level rise and flood exposure, coastal erosion and ecology, all mapped onto every 10-kilometer stretch of coastline in the world. With the tool, one can locate vulnerable coastal areas that need protection. This helps to create the right dialogue and focus for climate adaptation actions.
Van Oord's Climate Risk Overview will play a key role in broadening understanding of climate risks and opportunities.
Let's connect for climate adaptation action.
Yeah, so that's briefly the tool. It's online, so you can I can share the address with you later on. You can also find it via our website, vanoord.com. You can find the climate risk overview, and then you can select for yourselves. You can select on a number of people. So there's on this side, there's a legend where you can say, well, I want to find the spots where there's 10 by 10 kilometers, where there's living minimum 1,000 people. Because we don't have the intention to save the coastline in Sahara. If there's nobody living behind it, that's less urgent than we would feel. And you can also look at other things which are in the area. We used open source data, and internally we have another tool which contains a little bit more data, and slowly we want to release that data also to this platform so it can be used for other people as well. But some commercial data we would like to keep for ourselves, but in principle all data which can be helpful we want to share with the rest of the world. So we also have the mangrove locations in the world in there, so we know exactly according to the open source data where the mangroves are. So if there's mangrove presence, we know there could be potential to use a nature-based solution implementing mangroves. And the same accounts for coral, and as Alejandro mentioned this morning, we also are very active in regenerating corals. We feel that, let's say, with the current scenarios from the IPCC, it says, well, if the sea goes with 2 degrees, there might be 90% or maybe more coral disappearing. So I think it's very important that we understand which are the resistant corals. And maybe we can assist with our coral engine to replicate, let's say, more resistant corals worldwide. Then let's move on to the next slide. This is a sample in Senegal of a solution, but I think this morning you already had quite an extensive presentation from Alejandro, so I won't go into these details. Then we also have a project in Beckton, which is an nature-based solution, which we also mentioned this morning. I think once again, I think the PPP scheme where we have a public-private partnership where there's value behind coastlines which can be used, I think is a very interesting model. And we really want to look also how we can do that worldwide, and maybe there will be other places where we can, in Latin America, where we can do the same. I think there's already in the world, there's 3 sand engines. I'm recently, last week, talking to Vietnam, also trying to get a sand engine in place, and there's been a large interest into it. But it is not easy to implement things which are not being used in countries. Then maybe a little bit something which is more appealing to, let's say, the Caribbean states. This is a project in the Maldives. We are currently working in Ado City, and we're working in a very complex environment. We're in the middle of, you see in the Indian Ocean. It's very far away. There's not a lot of land, so the population is growing. And if you look at the projections from the United Nations, then they think that in 2050 the population will double. So what are we going to do with all these people? There's no space. So then you need to work in a very sensitive environment to create additional land. Of course, you need to be careful where you put your reclamations. But if you look at this map, we see we've got protected areas in red. We have corals to take care of in pink. We have seagrass in green. And then the reclamation area, as you see, is yellow. That's where the place where we are going to do the reclamation. And there's fishing grounds, and also there's tourism happening at the moment, which we need to look after. So this is a very nice project where we are taking this very seriously in stakeholder management. We have an environmental impact assessment, but we internally within Van Oord find that the local way the environmental impact assessments are being made are not up to the standard we feel that should be. So we're doing additional work at our own expense to make sure that this project is being done in an environmentally friendly manner. To show you an example. So this is the work in progress. As you see here on the left, this is already a part of the reclamation. So there is a little bit of coral in the footprint, which we partly were relocating. It's the largest relocation of coral which has been done in this region. 70,000 colonies are being transplanted to a different location. And we try to make small new islands for tourist resorts, because there's always a balance between, on the one side, the countries like the Maldives, they want to be independent. So the Ministry of Environment also mentioned we don't want any funds to let's say, help us, but we want to help ourselves, be able to help ourselves. So they always look also to create some economic activity to generate the income, because this is a loan from India and they want to repay that loan. So I think in the end it's a good idea that they also include something for tourism where they can generate income and be sustainable for the future. So currently the work is progressing nicely. Also with dredging, it's always turbidity, which could be effective for the corals. So we have strict regulations. We're measuring where the turbidity is to make sure that the corals are not being hindered or being stressed. And we have periods where we're not being allowed to dredge because of the corals. Then next slide is showing a little bit how this works. It's all, we're involving the local community a lot for this coral relocation. We already completed the full scope. This is a picture during the works. So we have divers really taking the corals by hand and transforming them to a different location, which is going to be a new artificial reef, and also, let's say, could be used for to attract also divers and for people to appreciate the corals. And on the right side, you see the corals being attached to a frame, and then that will totally create a reef structure on the water. Then let's move on to the next slide. Seagrass was also mentioned. We are very active in seagrass. This was also not a scope from the environmental impact assessment. I think it was mentioned earlier that For the Maldives, seagrass importance was not so noticed initially. But we know that if we remove seagrass, then that will have an effect on biodiversity, because seagrass is required in the ecosystem to nourish fish, which are also swimming between the corals. So we decided on our own expense to transplant seagrass. So we do that by making 25 by 25 centimeter small blocks, take it out of the existing footprints, and then we remove it with also a lot of help of local community. And we're going to plant it into a checkboard pattern, and then we hope that in the empty spaces between these new transplants that this seagrass will grow on its own. So it's all, we're going to monitor this as well. So we also said, well, we're going to monitor this for the future. We want to learn from this, and we want to use it in other places as well. Then I want to talk a little bit about the partnerships we have. So the ORA is the Ocean Risk and Resilience Action Alliance, which we have been, let's say, starting with at COP26. And there's the Global Center on Adaptation, which is, let's say, also helping with finance bringing in. And for the knowledge development, we have EcoShape, which is a platform including Dutch government, knowledge institutions like Deltaris, but also Hans Koning with Van den Bos, a lot of, let's say, engineering companies who are here. And the third is always local communities. We feel that if we're somewhere in the country, we need to talk to the local stakeholders and involve the local communities, because if we don't involve local communities, and we're going to create mangroves, but if we go away and the mangroves are going to be used for firewood or for coal production, then we're doing not good for the world. So we really try to look at long term and talk to local communities. And of course, finance is important, so we're also talking to the Dutch government, who have a few countries in the world. There are 14 countries which have got priority with Invest International, and we can also now bring in grants from the government to help us develop these projects. Then a little bit on the barriers for nature-based solutions. I think one of the big barriers is always finance, how to fund these projects. I think especially if there's no revenue streams in a investment, because there's no, let's say, direct benefits. It's not that you are, let's say, creating tourism directly and can benefit from it, like the project in Sali. There was a huge impact. We have measured it by an independent consultant, and it shows that we created 55 million worth of benefits to the country. But how to get these dollars into the pocket for coastal protection is always very difficult, because, let's say a fisherman bringing good for the communities and the community to flourish, but it's very difficult if in a country where there's no tax really being registered, how do you get this money in advance into these coastal protections? So no direct income. I think also we've been looking at insurance. Some things are insured behind the coastline, and then there might be opportunities that we say, okay, there's a benefit for the insurance company. So we're looking how to do that. But in general, we see there's a lot of money coming in once there's a disaster. Like we had in the Netherlands in 1953, this big disaster. And then the Netherlands said, now we're going to step up our game, and we're going to make a lot of funds available to make the Netherlands resilient. And we hope with our proactive role to be in advance of this, so that we don't have to wait for disaster, but that we can be proactive and prevent disasters. Also, another thing we see a lot is that a lot of politicians are focused on short-term gains rather than long-term. We are talking here about a long-term problem, and sometimes there's more urgency on the national budget for other reasons, which is difficult to get funding for these resilient projects. There may be one thing on obstacles, how to implement nature-based solutions. I think we're still struggling sometimes to find in countries design codes about these nature-based solutions. Like the sand engine we are familiar with in the Netherlands, but there were some people in the Netherlands who said, well, yeah, we want to try this here, and we know how beach nourishment works, and we want to learn how to do this in the future. So nature-based solutions are also sometimes learning by doing. And that is sometimes complicated when there's banks involved. They want security, they want to de-risk their projects, and if there's uncertainty in a project, then it's difficult sometimes to arrange it. So design codes, also procurement is sometimes focused, or most of the time focused on lowest price, and that doesn't generate the best nature solution, because a lot of procurement law doesn't value nature into the equation of the procurement. Further, I think what we see is that the design of a coastal protection normally takes about 10 years from the urgency of the problem till the signed contract. And in that meantime, a lot of people get a little bit of tunnel vision sometimes, and then some countries want a hard dike rather than a nature-based solution, because a nature-based solution means lower cost, but it also means more work for the people to maintain it. Then my last slide, then look at what's happening in the international community. I've got this from a report which the multilateral banks themselves made, and they have been looking how much money has been spent in 2021. You might be aware that there has been pledges being made that $100 billion for climate finance should be made available. If I look at the multilaterals for 2021 in their own report, they say 50 billion went to climate adaptation and climate mitigation, of which 8% was a grant, and the rest is loans, so that need to be repaid. It could be soft loans, but it had to be repaid in the end. So you need to get finance in the end. And then if I look at how much has been the split between mitigation and adaptation, then we see that only 17 billion has been spent on climate adaptation. The rest of the money has been going to climate mitigation. And then if you look at what's happening in the coastal zones, then it's getting even worse. Then we see that only $500 million in this report has been spent in that year on really climate adaptation. And I feel that in the light what's coming ahead with sea level rise and severe storms, I think we should be spending as a world much more funds into coastal protection and making the world ready for a new situation, which I think we are on a pathway already onto. So, yeah, we like to call up to the international community, and I think let's hope that there might be an opportunity in the loss and damage fund discussion in COP28, where there might be a fund where they say, well, okay, there are some countries, for example, there's a country, Tuvalu, in the Pacific. It's a country of 10,000 people. I think if you look at their CO2 footprint, they didn't cause the sea level rise, but they are suffering from it. And if we don't do anything, then this country doesn't exist anymore in about maybe 50 years. Because they're very low at the sea level, and then this country is gone. Yeah, what to do? So I hope that this, maybe the loss and damage fund could be a, let's say, mechanism where we organize finance to help these small island states in developing their coastal resilience. Then that was it for what I wanted to say, and I would like to ask if there's any questions. And then I think, preferably in English, but otherwise I'll use this translation. Yes, this one is easy. This is in English. From our studies, we have not looked currently in this study for the positive for the wave activity. For us, it's more initially the biodiversity and keeping the, let's say, the nature value in. But obviously, I think in the future we also want to look at the wave reduction of it. Personally, I think we are looking to do submerged breakwaters, a little bit looking what the lady who won the competition thought about the oyster reefs. We're also looking to make submerged reefs or living reefs. And what we want to do is we want to create a submerged reef based off of different structures and then attach the corals to it, and then see which base is going to give the best result in creating an artificial reef or a living reef. And the complexity of that reef structures is that if you put corals in a wave environment, speeds are very high. It takes time to get the resilience into the system. So if we use a solid base and we put the corals onto it and then let nature take over, I think that is a good way forward. And in the future, I think, because in the nature, currently corals are already growing with the sea level. So if you look at reefs in the Maldives, I think sea level is rising now faster than what is anticipated, but there is, let's say, the reefs are growing to a certain level below sea level, so they will grow in the future. So we feel that that is going to be the first solution we're trying to use, and then in the future we'll also look at seagrass, but we have to focus a bit on first things first. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, that's a very good question. What is the survival rate? We really have to see. We can't make any promises, but we're really doing everything. We have, I think, when I started working 25 years ago, we're like myself, all technicians from Delft, and no marine biologist. I think we have 15 marine biologists working for us. 15 people already, and I think, and it's growing. So we're really looking into how can we best keep these relocated corals. How can they best survive, and what are the conditions they need? So we have been talking also with the local community about it. What is the best place? So I cannot give you any details yet. Hopefully in a few years we know a little bit about survival rates. I think another factor is, let's say, bleaching. Coral bleaching is a serious issue also in the Maldives. We don't know exactly how it comes. So that if we have a bleaching event, that could affect seriously the corals. Having said that, we also see that corals have a good recovery rate, so they can also sometimes survive again and thrive and come back. Maybe one thing on the survival rate of our coral engine. We have a coral engine which we use in the Bahamas. To give you a little bit of an idea, in nature, 1% of all spawning coral seeds will grow into corals. So then the survival rate is 1%. If we do that in a laboratory, and we collect all the data of, let's say, all the sexual reproduction material, and we're going to do it in a laboratory, we can do 30%. So we can generate 30 times more coral in the laboratory and then make small seedlings out of it and then place them back into nature. So I think by using that techniques we could increase speed on reproducing corals. But still, it's in a young. It's still we have track record, but we also see here that it's difficult to get funding for these type of projects. Do you use all methods of microfragmentation for coral propagation? Yes, we do. We also do that. We also make the. I think in this case in the Maldives we are just now using. We're taking one colony, and then we're completing the full colony. But we can also. We have done, I think, on the Bahamas also. Let's say make a microfragmentation of these corals and then breeding them up in the laboratory. And then setting them out on a coral tree underneath the water, which is a bit more labor intensive, but we're still learning on what the best way to do is. Yeah. Any more questions? All clear? Thank you.